everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to The Good Trouble Show. For centuries, hubris convinced man that everything in the universe was revolved around the Earth. That was until the astronomer Copernicus bucked the system and proposed that Earth actually revolves around the Sun, spawning what is known as the Copernicus Revolution. So today, the hubris of astronomers such as Neil deGrasse Tyson dismisses the possibility that non-human intelligence is here interacting with folks on Earth and its inhabitants. Today's guest is part of a new generation of astronomers whose lack of hubris puts them at the cusp of their own Copernicus revolution and revelations. The revelation that we are not alone, and proof may lie in a set of astronomical plates taken during the UFO flap of 1952 in Washington, D.C. But first, do us a favor, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show and all other social media platforms at The Good Trouble Show. And of course, you can find us on all your favorite podcasting platforms, Spotify, Apple, all that kind of good stuff. We also need help keeping the lights on. You can become a supporter of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com. Where is it? There we go. Patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And for the price of a coffee, you can support our work. And finally, Super Chats are open on YouTube and are another great way to support this show. And as always, I want to thank our Patreon and YouTube members, our chat moderators who volunteer their time every Sunday to keep the chat room going, and of course, all of you that are watching. We really appreciate the generosity of your time. Okay, on with the show. Today's guest we recorded yesterday morning, and I think all of you will enjoy what she has to say, especially regarding the 1952 UFO flap we mentioned earlier. Our interview with astronomer Dr. Beatriz Villarroeal. Enjoy. Today's guest is a world-renowned astronomer, researcher, and assistant professor at the Nordic Institute of Physics at Stockholm University. Now, while most astronomers such as Neil deGrasse Tyson and others are busy trying to debunk the UAP phenomenon, this astronomer has the tools, drive, and scientific curiosity to look for proof that we are not alone in the universe. Please welcome Dr. Beatriz Villarroeal. Beatriz, how are you?
Thank you. So happy to be here.
I'm super happy to have you here. It's so you're what in Switzerland, correct?
In Sweden.
Sweden. Okay, sorry. It was an S. I was somewhat close.
I have a close guess because I have been a postdoc in Switzerland in Zurich, so it's easy to confuse.
Gotcha. Okay, so you have a master's degree in physics, a doctorate in astronomy. Your work has been published in major scientific journals. You have won multiple awards, including the L'Oreal UNESCO Award for Women in Science, and the award was for International Rising Talents. And recently, the Mitchell Lecture Prize at Texas A&M University. I mean, that is quite a list of accomplishments. What made you decide to pursue the field of astronomy?
So I'm just a very, very curious person, and there have been like multiple events in my life when I had to make a small turn from one thing to another based on curiosity and other factors. And I was actually originally studying something entirely different. I was on a civil engineering program of biotechnology. And on the fourth year, I just decided to change everything. And I went into astronomy.
Wow. And I take it it's a pretty interesting field, just not even counting the whole UAP issue.
It's super interesting. And there's so many things happening. And I mean, it's a very vibrant field. And of course, if one is curious, you want to know more about the universe. And I myself started off with active galactic nuclei and quasars, trying to understand those. But then I got really obsessed by this question about vanishing stars and whether a star could vanish. And from that, I got into the UAP issue. And I always just tried to follow my gut feeling.
Wow. And was this something that you were interested in as a kid, or you just decided when you were in college, it's like, this is what I want to pursue?
You mean the UAP issue or the astronomy?
The astronomy.
The astronomy. No, it was like it came to me over time, actually, I always loved astronomy, but I always heard that this is not a good field because there's a lot of unemployment. You need to do something else. While bioengineering was both interesting and had good prospects for being employed. So I was very interested in all the bio things when I was a teenager, and I studied it a lot in my free time. And then I think at the university, I started wondering about, well, if there was life elsewhere, but also these questions about galaxies, how are they formed? Because I was thinking about proteins and how they're folding. And from that, I started thinking about galaxies, where some galaxies spiral galaxies and other are flat. And I just wanted to learn these things. And I started taking some astronomy courses. And well, and over time, I had to say bye-bye to the bio stuff.
Awesome. So what was the earliest you sort of remembered thinking about the possibility of extraterrestrials in the universe?
Well, as a kid, already, I think when I was a child, I was super annoying to my parents, even as a small kid. My big brother had also this fantastic habit of that when my parents left, he was showing me these movies like Terminator, Star Wars, and I think this had an impact on the kind of movies and ideas I like to work with. And I remember already in my childhood, when I was 6, 7, I was wondering about aliens and whether there was life elsewhere and whether aliens were coming to the Earth. And I was talking a lot about that and wanted to know more. And I was just a very curious kid.
So in your experience, have you found that most of your colleagues are still skeptical about the idea that UAPs perhaps are already here? Or do you think that you're finding that more of them are starting to open up their thinking to the possibility?
More and more are opening up. And I think what is also happening is that there's a little bit of a generation difference. That I think older astronomers are more often skeptical, while younger astronomers are intrigued, because I think like personalities like Avi Loeb have brought a lot of inspiration to the younger generation to pursue this issue. And since he's doing that, then a lot of younger people feel like, okay, I can do that too. So
yeah, I constantly like scratch my head when I see Neil deGrasse Tyson, that who by the way is a member of he's on this board of fellows for this debunker organization called Center for Inquiry. So he goes on CNN or whatnot, and somebody asks him about UAPs, UFOs. You think you're hearing it from somebody that is kind of an unbiased person, but the fact that he sits on the board of fellows of this organization whose purpose is to go and debunk things. To be honest, I'm not sure what's up with that. Okay, now, as I mentioned in the intro, you just gave a lecture just a few weeks ago, I think, at Texas A&M University, and I understand that this was a pretty big honor. And
it's a super big honor, and I was so happy to be there and giving this lecture. It was a beautiful experience.
And tell me a bit about the lecture. What did you speak about?
So I talked actually about about searches for vanishing stars, about searches for extraterrestrial artifacts, and about UAPs and I tried to bring in connect my research to the UAP research and show how things have been evolving in the last years. It was super fun. There were lots of kids also in the lecture, and they asked really good questions. So
and were a lot of the questions related to the UAP UFO phenomenon, or was it more just like just a straight science of? No,
they were super interested in the UAP phenomenon because it shows that there's a genuine interest from the public to understand whether aliens could already be here.
And for instance, the people that sponsored you, or Texas A&M, the academics that you were speaking with, and interacting with, that were part of A&M, do they seem to be much more open to the whole idea of UAP already being here?
I think I heard the most beautiful lecture about UAPs was actually this 5 minutes or 3 minutes introduction by Professor Nick Santsev, when he talked about why UAPs must be studied. by scientists and astronomers, and it was such an amazingly good lecture. And I think people there treated me really well. I think they were interested and open-minded, and the entire view of scientists is changing because people understand that this is a serious thing to be studied. But what many astronomers feel, that I notice and where I also share, is the need to work with hypothesis-driven methods. And well, I can expand on that a bit later, why I think this is so important, because I think the UFO problem has been suffering from that people all the time work with it as a dumping category rather than test the most important hypotheses to build good theories or models. And I think that change has to come from scientists.
Got it. Do you think 10 years ago you would have been invited to places like Texas A&M to speak about UAP?
No, I think 10 years ago it would be impossible to talk about this topic anywhere. And I think, again, that there a lot of good things have happened because of the 2021 Ordinary Report, as well as the start of the Galileo project, where they actually have managed to destigmatize something.
So why do you think in the past, and we'll talk about what happened at Harvard, there was such skepticism among astronomers? I mean, even today, I think like Seth Shostak, who's involved with SETI, is still very skeptical that UAPs are already here. Why do you think that was the case, and why do you think it has shifted?
Well, I do think that there was actually some sort of controlled ways of stigmatizing the topic to make, I think there was probably a purpose behind creating such a huge stigma as we see today. And even the way how people usually work with a UFO question, if you look at it, we have many professional societies that collect UFO reports, and then they go through this UFO report, and what cannot be explained, the dumping category becomes a UFO. And then they work sometimes with this single cases, and then depending on how good is the physicist, they can come up with certain explanations, but then usually these case studies are never published, or at least not published in a peer-reviewed classical scientific journals, so they just vanish as these kind of reports. And I think there's a certain problem when one works in this way, and that is that one is not working hypothesis-driven, but one works by trying to explain away things rather than trying to test if a particular hypothesis can be rejected or not. And I think by renaming it from flying saucer into UFO, of course, we can include many more different kind of signatures, but at the same time, we have taken away a very specific thing that can be tested and an easy hypothesis to work with, and we have made something very difficult to work with. And if we don't have really a hypothesis to test, then we cannot really work with the scientific methods. And by stigmatizing the hypothesis, then we also stop the scientific progress. So there's a lot to be said about this way that one stopped talking about flying saucers or alike and went into talking about UAPs. I personally am not interested into UAPs that are man-made. Let's say I'm not interested in missiles or anything like that. For me, the interesting thing is really, is ET here? And that is what I'm wondering about. And then I want to have very specific and clear and testable things to search for, or signatures.
And we'll get into, you and I spoke earlier about kind of being more specific in terms of the naming of different things in that we were observing. And I want to dig into that. But a few minutes ago, I mentioned Dr. Seth Shostak, who is one of the main guys at SETI. So for folks that have no idea what SETI is, tell us a bit about that.
Okay, so I just want to say that I personally have a very good experience with Seth Shostak. He has been very kind and supportive to me.
Great.
So I actually, I enjoy talking to him about my work.
Awesome.
And so SETI, such as for extraterrestrial intelligence, sometimes people, when they think about SETI, they are thinking about the SETI Institute in California. But SETI is also the complete field, like the complete field of searches, which includes searching for Dyson spheres, searching for, of course, the radio SETI, or searching for megastructures, or searching for artifacts near the Earth. It includes everything. And but usually, traditionally, at the SETI Institute, they only do this radio SETI and some astrobiology stuff, and a little bit of optical on the side. For example, I think the most important project there is probably Laser SETI, led by Elliot Gillum. It's a beautiful project.
So while SETI is looking for signals of extraterrestrial intelligence, are they set up to detect things that are close to the Earth as opposed to thousands of light years away, or is it just kind of a different approach?
If you mean the SETI Institute, I have not seen that they are doing anything in the solar system. They seem to be very focused on far away searches.
And as far as
sorry.
Okay, and no, it's okay. There's a bit of delay here. So, as far as like telescopes, as a layman here, a telescope is not really useful for visually detecting something close to the Earth, correct?
No, we will be using telescopes to search for things close to the Earth with the EXO project. So it's very useful, of course.
It is, okay.
Now, inside, I personally am not interested to look inside the atmosphere, where one, of course, can just use cameras. You don't need always telescopes. But if you are searching outside the atmosphere and you're looking at interesting satellites-like objects, then, of course, telescopes will be fantastic.
Of course. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So now in 2017, you founded Vasco, or the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations. And before we dig into the whole Vasco thing, was this your kind of first academic work, scientific work looking into UAPs?
Actually, I didn't know it was that it would lead me to UAPs at that time. So it was like this. When I was a student, actually, I think even undergrad, I don't remember if I was an undergrad student or a graduate student, I was writing short stories and entertaining myself with that kind of stuff. And I was writing some story about a depressed quasar, and then I started wondering, can a star or any other object just vanish? It became a thought that it was something I did in this little fable. I had a wormhole there, and then I just got stuck with this thought, like, can an object vanish? But it took me a couple of years before I actually could do it. I was searching for ways of testing if something vanished from the sky, and in 2016, when I was a PhD student on my fourth year, I found I found the methods. I found a catalog from the US Naval Observatory, where they had compiled everything on the sky in the 50s. And I said, this catalog I can use. And I started manually searching for things that have vanished. And then we found something that we thought could have been a vanishing star. Now we know it wasn't a vanishing star. It was some kind of short-lived transient that appeared and vanished, which is similar, which actually leads us into this UAP question. But it took a couple of years, because until we found multiple of these transients, that was already in 2020, that was in the last week of February 2020, which is the same time as the pandemic started, when I found 9 stars that appeared and vanished at the same time. And I started saying, something is weird here. Something is really weird with my candidates of vanishing stars. And that is how I started coming into this UAP business.
Now, you also have a theory that robotic technological probes created by non-human intelligence were sent all over the Milky Way galaxy to study different solar systems. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, imagine, okay, we can go quite wild here.
Sure,
Let's go into speculation mode. Imagine you would have kind of this either self-replicating or not self-replicating, but you could have a civilization building lots of probes that they could send all over the galaxy, and you might have thousands or millions of them just in our own solar system, and they might be around collecting information, and they might be also having an AI installed, and maybe with the other network they will be updating the network throughout the galaxy, like with this information, so that you have a so-called global AI that is connecting all these little probes. And such a probe, I mean, we are capable of sending something to another stellar system. Let's say if Voyager 1 would take maybe 75,000 years or so to get to the nearest star. And in a similar fashion, these probes could be sent everywhere. And now imagine if you have these probes that are updating themselves and self-repairing and also updating the AI for maybe 1 billion years. Now that would be a very, very good AI. And you can go even further in the speculation mode. So my favorite toy model now that I'm working with. Mm-hmm. Let's see if it will appear in some publication after I talk about it. But my favorite toy model is that imagine if these probes not only would be all over the galaxy, but they also would be capable of interacting with the brain of an organism. You could send information in and out through this brain, and a lot of these esoteric experiences people could have would be an effect of that you have an AI doing predictions and sending information and receiving information. And I just like this idea of probes. I think that would be a very neat way to communicate, and you wouldn't need any new physics. A lot of things that people experience could be explained in terms of these kind of probes.
Now, you spoke earlier about a transients that you had detected, and you provided us with some photographic plates that demonstrate this. And we'll show those in a second, but before we show the plates, what are photographic plates?
So in the 1950s, when astronomers were studying the sky, they didn't have these modern cameras with CCDs that we have today, but what they had were like big glass plates. And these big glass plates had a coating of a light-sensitive material, usually silver or something similar. And so one used these big glass plates to put them into your observatory, into the holder of the telescope, and one imaged the sky. And they were usually very, very big and heavy. And today, these glass plates, they're, of course, because since they're so sensitive, people have digitized them. They have scanned them, they have digitized them, and they have made them publicly available. Like the Palomar Observatory has done that, like digitized a big fraction of these plates. While the plates are still in a vault, they are not so accessible to people, but the digitized images, anyone can go and watch online.
And when these photographic plates were taken, were they like taken year round, or astronomers would go in and take a big batch and then maybe come back a month later and take another set? How often, on average, would you say per month would folks go and take these plates at these at the telescopes?
They usually, I think they went there. Now I'm going to make a guess because I haven't talked to anyone actually. But they usually went there, put in a plate, pointed it at the sky, and it's a 6 by 6 degrees plates. And then maybe 50 minutes of exposure for if I was interested in the red bits of the light. And then after 50 minutes of exposure, they, of course, went there after they have exposed these images. They go and they treat it with all this chemistry that they needed to develop the plates, and then they got their images.
Okay.
Now
So
I have never worked with film myself, so I'm not going to explain how they did the magic there.
yeah, sure.
But, several plates per night, I would say that they must have been using at least 4, maybe. Depending on how long is the night and which time of the year.
All right, so let's show the plates and tell. I'll bring these up on the screen. So this is the first set that you provided, and explain what we're looking at here.
So this is a discovery made by my colleague Enrique Solano, who is also the first author on the paper where we presented this example. And here you see something really weird. You see three things that look like a star that are there on an image in one of these photographic plates from the 19th of July, 1952. And they are three very bright and beautiful stars. They are there, and then they are never seen again. And you cannot even find them half an hour earlier, or was it later? Well, they seem to appear and vanish within this 50 minutes of the exposure.
And is your theory that something that what we're looking at on the left is a UFO, UAP, or what is your theory as to, like, for instance, yeah, go ahead, please.
So we have been thinking about a lot of different explanations, and we have been even wondering if it, we have been looking at a lot of different explanations, and we have no good astrophysical explanation to explain these three things that appear and vanish. And to add that, of course, we also still keep in mind that maybe this is some very unlikely type of plate defect where you have some kind of dirt on the plate. But the problem is that they really look like stars, and their brightness profile is similar to the real stars in the field, while if you would have some kind of defect, they would come in random shapes, not looking like the stars, and especially not three of them. And so I think one of the possibilities is that if you cannot explain it with something astrophysical, something that could explain that is if you would have some kind of artificial object in orbit around the Earth. In fact, if you would use the same type of instrumentation as they used in 1950 on Mount Palomar and look at the sky today, you would find a lot of examples of multiple transients, simply because you have a lot of reflections that come from, like when you have a lot of satellites or space debris reflecting sunlight, then you can also get that kind of effect. And so seeing that today wouldn't be surprising. Now, seeing that in 1952, 5 years before the first human satellite, that is surprising. But also, if you would have something emitting light for a short moment, you could also get that type of effect. So I think that is kind of very interesting. And one more thing to say is that by pure coincidence, which we didn't know when we found it and when we had already written the paper, and when we found out, thanks to my friend Dave Altman that pointed me to it, by pure coincidence, this happens on the 19th of July, 1952, which is a famous date because it's one of the most famous UFO sightings through history, when people saw UFOs on radars, visually, and they even hunted UFOs with jets. So this is such a big thing, and it's quite funny that our most beautiful example happens on that date. So this is where it gets really funny. So after Dave pointed out this thing of the 19th of July for the candidate that Enrique had found and where we were writing the paper, I started wondering, but hey, we have this paper from last year where we had been looking for things that were aligned, because if you look for multiple transients that are also aligned, then you have an even better case for an artifact in orbit around the Earth. And that was a paper that we couldn't really get published because it was so much stigma when we just sent it to a journal. The journals get scared immediately. They don't even, like, in some cases, wouldn't even go to review. And so there was this paper, there were 5 candidates, there were 2 statistically significant candidates, and there was 1 top candidate. So the top candidate is the one that you see. And in the paper, I had written that it happened on the 28th of July, 1952. However, I had counted the dates. I had transformed the dates wrongly. So it actually happened on the 27th of July, 1952, I learned after that I corrected for the error when I was transforming from Julian dates to this normal calendar. And so it happened the 27th of July, 1952 is also a quite special date, because that's the second weekend of the Washington UFO flyover. So now we have 2 coincidences, our absolutely best candidates from these aligned transients and the triple transient. And this is, of course, now we have 2 coincidences, and this one just the alignment, we were estimating the probability for this alignment that you can see with the 5 objects in a narrow stripe is 1 in 10,000.
Wow.
And that's something like a little bit more than a so-called 4 sigma statistical significance on this alignment and detection. And you can compare that to the detection of this JWST biosignature that is a 1 sigma detection. So statistically, this is a much stronger one. But we had troubles getting it published. I lost a little bit of courage, so it has been staying there, and I have to try to make myself rework it, update that paper from 22 that is on archive, correct the errors, like this problem with the date that I had there when I calculated it wrongly, and also resubmit it once more and try the best.
So when I'm looking at the plate, so I see on the left here, you've got 5 objects circled, and they're not particularly big compared to some of the others in there. And then the plate on the right, they're just completely gone. So one would think, like, I could see how if you had like one that appeared and disappeared, you mentioned earlier maybe it was dust or some sort of problem with the plate itself, with the raw material. But it seems unlikely that you would have it in, essentially 3 different places.
Yeah, and also in a line or in a narrow stripe. So that was also the whole point of looking for alignments, was to separate the idea of that we had some very, very strange type of plate defects or dust or whatever, that not only that they, that had some exactly star-like appearances, but we said, okay, let's also see if some of these are aligned, because if some of these are aligned, that would defy the idea of that this is some kind of random plate defects with some very star-like shapes. And that was the whole point of looking for alignments. And now we had these 2 candidates that were statistically significant, and this one that was a 1 in 10,000 that I showed. So I think I have to make one more try with that paper and rework it and update it.
Do you know what the time difference was? Was it, I think earlier you mentioned it was usually like a 50-minute interval. Was it
Same
50?
there.
It was the same thing, right?
Yes.
Wow.
We always have one additional plate that is either half an hour earlier or half an hour later, and it's not there either.
And did in the subsequent plates, were those objects back again once they had disappeared?
No, they vanished, and we actually even used the world's largest telescope, Gran Telescopio Canarias. One of our collaborators, Stefan, is working, and we used it to point there, and we find nothing.
Wow. Okay.
That was an experience.
Yeah. So they disappear and they never reappear. So now in plates previous to the first one, were the objects or were the points of light there, for a long period of time, or did they only appear in one plate and then disappear? So it was only the one plate where they were there.
Well, given that we have been seeing this phenomenon also sometimes with the single transients, it seems like they were not there before, but it seems to be something that really appears and vanishes within this plate exposure. Very brief. And it doesn't streak. It kind of appears.
And so you say that it didn't streak. Would streaking be so the fact that it doesn't streak, what does that tell you?
So if you would have an asteroid and it would be moving in and out into the plate, let's say you would have a very fast moving asteroid, so it's there in one image and it's not there in the other, then it's not going to leave you a point source. It's not going to look like a star. You will going to have the movement of the asteroid also. It will look like a streak. And the same if you have a meteor, it just streaks through. But something that moves very fast will leave these kind of streaks. Now, if the asteroid is moving very slowly, you're going to see it in more than one image. You will see it in the subsequent image as well. Here we don't see it in the subsequent image, and we don't see a streak. So it seems like it's stationary, appearing or vanishing, something, let's say, like if you would have we were wondering if this could be an optical afterglow of a gamma ray burst or something like that, where you have something happening during 2 minutes. But the problem is that you have several of them, several of these very exotic things that would happen and vanish, appear and vanish within some minutes. And it's the number density that is the trouble with these images. And something that can produce that kind of effect, again, is if you have solar reflections or some kind of brief flashes coming from artificial objects in orbit around the Earth, or actually maybe even inside the atmosphere. But yes.
And again, this was, when these plates were taken, this was before satellites were in our near Earth orbit, or satellites period. No one had satellites up in the air during this period of time in our history, correct?
Exactly, and you wouldn't also have any airplanes that would have, let's say if you would be thinking about possible effects inside the atmosphere, there were no airplanes that had lamps that would blink that fast that they wouldn't streak, that it would leave a point source again. So, and there's no mundane explanation when it comes to like observable effects that could produce this kind of point source. So that's why I've been so interested by the UFO phenomenon, because I'm wondering, could this, what we see, are multiple transients observational signature of UFOs? That's what I'm asking, and I would like to find out. And we are working on that slowly, but we're working on trying to figure out if there is a connection between these two phenomena that can be straight.
And there's no way these could have been like, say, a reflection off of a meteor or something of that nature?
No. Again, it would be a meteor, it would be streaking.
Wow, amazing. So would you consider this definitive proof or certainly something that substantially adds weight behind the incident that happened over Washington, D.C.? I mean, like how...
I will say that yes, it adds weight to the Washington flap, although Wikipedia is removing our papers out of that.
I know all about Wikipedia.
They remove peer-reviewed papers, even those guerrilla skeptics. But I would say to find even more to find even more weight, we have to really establish the connection, because now it still can be two funny coincidences, and coincidences happen. And I'm working on that bit. I want to know that there is really a correlation, because sometimes things are just coincidental, and I want to know that it's not the case here. So I'm working on that. I want better.
Well, and I'm curious on Wikipedia. You mentioned that people keep removing it. What is the Wikipedia page that references it? This?
The Washington flap, 1952 page. Some friends of mine tried to put in the Vasco results there, and then it was removed by, I don't remember. Could it have been Lucky Louie, or no? It was some one of the other ones.
Yeah,
cleaned up.
Yeah, that's Susan Gerbich's propaganda arm called the Guerrilla Skeptics that she runs. We've done a few things, a few episodes about those clowns. Okay, so moving on here. Now, I understand, speaking of photographic plates, that the head of the Harvard Observatory during the same period of time, Dr. Donald Menzel, destroyed literally, hundreds of photographic plates that they had in their archives. Tell us about that.
So actually, that's such an amazing story that I came across, like just by coincidence, thanks to an astronomer in Australia that pointed something, said, "Oh, you should read this book of Dorrit Hofflight." And I got that book. So there are some very peculiar circumstances. So the Palomar Observatory is really good. I mean, they have this, and they're doing beautiful work with collecting these photographic plates in the 50s. Surveying the sky in the 50s. But there was one more observatory that was, of course, considerably closer to Washington, D.C. And what observatory is that? Well, Harvard. And they have the world's largest plate collection. These guys have done the biggest survey ever, I mean, of the sky. And they have been doing it since, I think, 1888.
Wow.
So you have 150 years of plates. So you can do a lot of like astronomy where you look at variable objects and like seeing how they vary over time, over decades. It's a really valuable plate collection. And so what happens peculiarly is that the sequence of events is like this. When the Washington flap happens on the 29th of July, I think it was, the US Air Force holds a press conference. I think it was this General Samford, I think it was called. There's a picture of him online. He looks very serious. And he's citing some theories made by his by an astronomer called Donald Menzel, and this like explaining that he's basically explaining away the Washington UFO flyover by saying that these are temperature inversions, because Menzel had come up with this hypothesis, with his theory. And so he was citing Menzel, and he was apparently a lot in contact with this Menzel guy.
Okay.
And so funnily enough, 2 or 3 months after this, the same Donald Menzel, who was cited to debunk the whole Washington flap, he becomes director of Harvard Observatory. And the first thing he does is that he goes and destroys 1/3 of the photographic plate collection. And he doesn't even ask the astronomers. He asks his assistants to dispose of the plate collection, just by chance.
Wow.
And now there's an astronomer that opposes him, Dorrit Hoffleit, and she's describing this in a chapter calling Becoming Persona Non Grata, because he started making obstacles to her career in many different ways. And so because of that, she contradicted that he was destroying the plates or disposing of them.
Yes, sorry, the Zoom delay is really bad here. So you were saying that this was like one of the first things he did when he got the job. He walks in and he's like, "Hey, let's get rid of all these plates," without even "Hey, let's get everybody together and have several meetings, and then in a month we'll decide whether we want to keep these or not." Like literally, he goes in and job number one is get rid of the plates.
Exactly. And then the astronomers start complaining because they are not happy. And he says, okay, you can put them in the basement. And he sends them down in the basin where there's a lot of moisture. So the plates just get completely destroyed anyway.
So essentially what you're saying is like job number one, as soon as he walked in the door, was destroy these plates. It wasn't like he told everyone there, it's like, hey, there are a bunch of plates. We need to think about maybe getting rid of them or moving them to a storage unit or whatever. He doesn't even ask. He goes in and right out the gate just starts getting rid of them.
Yes, he asked, apparently, according to the book of Dorrit Hoffleit, he asked the assistant to dispose of the plates. And when a lot of astronomers start complaining on that the assistant is disposing of the plates, then he says, okay, you can put them in the basement of the observatory. But the basement has a lot of moisture, so they, of course, get completely, they are doomed, these plates. Wow. So 1/3 of the Harvard plate collection was destroyed in this way. He also wanted to dispose of some of the logbooks. And in 1953, he comes with an even better idea, and that is to stop the surveying of the sky. So for 15 years, the observatory wasn't surveying the sky, and they create this called Menzel Gap. So not only the plate destruction, but also the stopping of the survey. And the funny part with this Menzel guy, there are 2 more funny things about him. And at first, he was probably the top UFO debunker in the 50s. And he wrote all these books about UFOs, how you can explain them away. And the second thing is that he was working with the NSA. He had all the highest clearances just by a coincidence.
Right.
And even 2 more fun coincidences when we are at it. I love talking about these funny coincidences. It's engaging the imagination. And that is that apparently his name appears in these Majestic 12 documents, which are highly controversial documents. Nobody knows if they are really real or fake. And he was one of these Majestic 12 guys. So he's an immortal legend. And to make it even better, can you guess who was overseeing who was on the Harvard Board of Overseers, specifically involved in astronomy activities during the time when Menzel was a director.
I have no idea.
JFK.
John F. Kennedy. So before he was president, he was overseeing astronomy at Harvard?
Apparently so, according to Stanton Friedman's article. So I was like, wow, this is fun. I think astronomy at Harvard in the 1950s must have been amazing, even given that Alan Hynek became a ufologist there.
So is there any record of Menzel being associated with the CIA, or was it just the NSA?
I think it was just the NSA, but I don't know. There might be something about CIA too. I haven't checked him too well.
And do we know, like, in terms of the plates that he threw away, do we know what that time range would have been? Like, was it specifically in the 50s, or did it go back to the 1920s? What is that range that he...
No idea.
No idea. Wow. So,
and especially if some of the logbooks also have been thrown away, and if there's a match between the logbooks and the plates, we will never know.
Unbelievable. So here you have this guy who appears to be a professional debunker, similar probably to the professional debunkers that we have today, who gets hired or comes in, takes over the Harvard Astronomy Department. He's head of the Harvard Astronomy Department, and right when UFOs were really taking off in the 50s, he decides to A, stop looking in the skies, and B, gets rid of a bunch of what could have been potential evidence.
Well, it's a possible interpretation that was the reason. Maybe some astronomers at Harvard would claim that it was for saving space, like he was saying that it was to save space because there were too many plates. I find the whole thing far too peculiar that someone who, I mean, well, I'm not a good psychologist. I'm obviously an astronomer.
Right.
But I imagine that if you want to save space, you will not do it as the first thing when you come to a new job as a director. You will not just go there and destroy the plates. You would actually talk to the whole department and maybe make some kind of decisions. Okay, what should we throw away? How can we assess how we can create space? Or, I mean, I don't know how it works. At least I'm used to a quite flat hierarchy here in Sweden. I don't know how it could be at the observatory in Harvard. But for me, it looks like a very, very strange thing. And it's because destruction of data is very serious. It's a very serious thing in science. So it's interesting.
Sure. And, and the other thing to think about, too, it's like if this were, say, like, I don't know, a janitor or some assistant or that had no idea what they were and said, these things are taking up a bunch of space, let's get rid of them. I could see like someone like that maybe making an honest mistake, but for this esteemed astronomer to do that, I mean, that certainly seems suspicious. Do we know, I mean, is there a possibility the plates were moved, for instance, to NSA or CIA, or do we know that they definitely ended up in the trash?
We don't know that, because if he asked theoretically, if he asked the assistant to dispose of them, we don't know what dispose of means. Maybe they were disposed into a cardboard box and moved away. It's possible.
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely suspicious. Okay, so you've also developed a new concept on how we can look for UFOs, UAPs, or if these are probes or whatnot. Tell us about that.
So beyond the photographic plate work that we're doing, I'm working on a project called EXO Program, where me and Professor Geoff Marcy, who previously was at Berkeley, we have been working on developing a program to search for probes in the solar system today with modern instrumentation, because now there's a much bigger challenge than it was back in the 50s. In the 50s, there were no satellites, no space debris. If you find something artificial in orbit around the Earth, there you have your ET probe. Today, we have millions of pieces of satellites and space debris that are reflecting sunlight. And so what we have been doing is to develop a new program to search for kind of multiple transients in the solar system, something we hope to see the same phenomenon as we saw in photographic plates. And for that reason, we will need to use several telescopes in order to verify that any finding is actually real, that you can see it in multiple instruments and you validate the discovery immediately. And also we want to characterize it by taking a spectra the second you actually see the flash. And once you have several telescopes and you see a flash in multiple of them, and if you have something in the solar system, you will be able to localize it in 3D to know where it is. And the goal would be not only to detect such a transient, but to get the origin of it, localize the ET probe if it's there, track it, of course, and know what is causing this flash, whether we are seeing a flash due to that you have reflected sunlight, or if you're seeing flash because it's having a laser, or if you're seeing a flash because there's some very weird non-astrophysical emission that comes from the object. And we just want to know what is the origin of this light. So we have developed this EXO program. And any day soon, our main telescope is going to be shipped to New Mexico. We already have a telescope there that is going to take the spectrum, but the main telescope will be shipped very soon. So I'm very excited. And then we estimate we're going to get 3 terabytes of data every night from one telescope. So that's going to be a challenge to work with.
Oh, I'll bet. And again, the idea is that as opposed to just it being one telescope where you could say, maybe that photographic plate was flawed or something like that. The fact that you're using multiple telescopes to look at that same bit of sky, that helps triangulate and support the data, correct?
Exactly. And then I also came up with an idea of how to get rid of all the satellites and space debris, and that I cannot mention yet because I'm about to submit it in a couple of weeks to a journal. And then, so this kind of grew out of the frustration of not being able to really prove the authenticity of the multiple transients on the photographic plates, even if I think that it's overwhelmingly likely that they are real. I want to be able to conduct an experiment that is watertight. That's so that nobody can say that, it's probably something else. No, I want a watertight experiment.
So in general today, how much support is there for scientific research into UAP, and where are we in general in terms of really applying science to look for these objects?
So I would say that there's no government support for the UAPs yet, at least not in Sweden. So you can't get probably too easily funding for this kind of research. But I think this is going to change. I'm an optimist. I believe everything is going to work out to the better. And I think in terms of research, I think there's a lot of starting programs that are even if they have been starting for a couple of years. I think Galileo project is starting. They're working with entirely different methods. They're looking at the sky, although I think AVI nowadays is also got a little inspired also by the EXO probe techniques we're using by looking for transients, which makes me very happy to see. And I think UAPX also are working on their programs. So we have Galileo, UAPX, Hakan Kayal in Germany is doing beautiful projects. So there are now several groups that have started, and I hope that we will have collaboration and like friendly exchanges between the groups that work on this. So I'm very excited about where this is heading. Everyone are pioneers. And also, yes, there was a small workshop in Washington, D.C. that I wished I would have been on in person, but unfortunately I couldn't travel there. So I was there virtually. And the same in Paris, there are really, really good UAP specialists. And that's a Sigma 3 society, or Sigma 2. I always confuse Sigma 2 or Sigma 3. The 3AF Sigma 2 society, with the French UAP specialists, and they are doing an amazing work with looking at individual UAP cases.
Now, one question I've had regarding applying the scientific method to this whole thing is, from what I understand, you need to be able to repeat results or have repeatable results in a series of experiments in order to prove it. But when I think of UAP, I think that there's, I always kind of consider that there seems to be no predictability to it. So how do you apply the scientific method to UAP if you can't predict when they're going to show up, etc.?
Well, one thing we can do is that one has a very long time span, so that even if you don't see this particular UAP, you might see another type of UAP. And of course, like in the EXO project, if you see a UAP there once or a transit from a UAP and you localize it and you have characterized it, then you can say, okay, maybe the next UAP will have this kind of features as well, or it will not have. And if you will see this UAP or transit from the UAP 500 times, and you already know something about the properties of the object and of the phenomenon, then you can really build your model, and you will build the best model you can until it can be replaced by some better model. And I think that's the way how we work with it.
Okay. And we spoke earlier, prior to having you on the air, about the concept of not just labeling this stuff UAP, but what you're proposing is that we need to be more specific. So actually say flying saucer or triangle or orb. What is your thinking behind that?
So my thinking behind that is that when we work with a dumping category, let's say UAP is nowadays a dumping category. It can include missiles, it can include secret experiments, it can include a transmedium duck. Okay. And
right.
So it can include a lot of different things. But what are actually the interesting question for scientists? For a normal scientist, the interesting question isn't if there is a secret missile. For a civilian scientist, the interesting question is whether there is life outside the Earth and whether this intelligent civilization has sent something to our planet. That is the interesting question for the civilian scientist. And in order to make your searches more specific and work with hypothesis-driven methods so that you can actually answer the questions rather than going in a circle and arriving at it's an enigma. Because if you don't work with scientific methods here and you actually work with the dumping category, you're most likely going to iterate for a few centuries saying, oh, we don't know what it is, and now we have arrived at something mysterious. It's a mystery. And that's not an interesting thing. What we actually want to know is whether the most interesting hypothesis that we have, which in my case is the hypothesis of that it's an ET object coming here, for example, or any kind of non-human intelligence, it would be exciting, of course.
Sure.
But the most interesting question isn't what is UFO, or what is a UAP, or what is a UFO. The most interesting question is if the UFO phenomenon is caused by artificial objects from non-human intelligence. And in order to probe that, we of course need to know more specifically what we're looking for. Flying saucer or a glowing orb or a triangle, these things are very identifiable signatures. These things are things that you can look for with a survey. And then you don't need to sit and classify everything you see in the sky with an artificial intelligence and do this massive work. No, when you know precisely what you look for, you're shortening the path in your searches. It goes much faster. It's like, for me, we probably with the Vasco project, we were the first ones to look for artificial objects because we took these photographic plates and within 1 year we could already look for signatures of artifacts by looking for these aligned transients. And now that is something that you do because it's fast. You have a direct hypothesis, you have a direct signature you want to look for, and you look for it, and either you reject the hypothesis but find nothing, or you find some candidates. Now, if you want to be classifying everything you see in the sky, either with a report or with a survey, you're going to spend years doing that. And And since your survey isn't targeted on a specific signature, since you have a very open survey, then you will have a lot of troubles with distinguishing one thing from another. You will have a degeneracy. So once you find your UFO candidate, it could also be some human stuff, and it will have maybe 5 different types of explanations. If we skip doing this dumping category way of searches and instead go directly for saying that I'm going to look for flying saucers, you design your entire experiment to look for these flying saucers. And when you find a candidate, it will be a much, much more reliable candidate than what you can get with the open survey. And that is why I think that we should go hypothesis-driven, because also you will get rid of a lot of national security issues. I don't want to do any kind of research that pisses off any militaries. I respect what they do. I respect their concerns, and I don't want to interfere with their field. And my field is my interest lies really in the alien objects near the Earth. And if they have nothing to hide, they shouldn't worry about it either.
Right. Yeah.
And if they have nothing to hide and there's no cover-up, of course, they shouldn't bother about it.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important to design your experiment to a very, very clear hypothesis. And if you exclude that, and if you reject it and say, okay, there were no flying saucers, we couldn't find it after searching the sky for 3 years. Well, you rejected that hypothesis, and you know that there are no flying saucers, and you go to the next hypothesis. But at least you did it very carefully, and you did it well. While if you do this very open approach, you will have a lot of things that could be a flying saucer, or it could be a missile, or it could be something else, and you will argue forever. And I don't want to keep the mystery. I want to have the solution. That's how I look at the UAP question. I want us to, in a few years, have an answer to whether there are ET objects near the Earth or not.
I mean, it makes complete sense to me. It's like, why would you look for a wide variety of things and that take forever versus focus on one particular thing that, it's obviously going to yield better results. So that makes complete sense to me. So, so what is next for you, and how can our viewers at home follow your work?
So, the most important thing that is coming for me now is that setting up the telescopes in New Mexico and getting that to run, because I've been waiting due to the administrative delays. Who knew that it can take so many months just to put an order through a university purchase process? So getting that working is the number one thing for me. Number two thing is really establishing a relation between, seeing if there is a relation between the multiple transits and UFOs. I want to know it's with hard data, if the things that we saw during the Washington flap is a coincidence, or whether this is actually a proof of that this event, that there were artificial objects involved in this event. And there's a third thing actually also that I don't think many people know about, but that I can tell about here a little bit. So together with some guys in UAP Sweden, a very, very wonderful society in Sweden that is very interested in the experiencer side of UFO observations, we have started a small project called the European UFO Crash Retrieval Initiative.
Wow.
And so we're using the Vasco website to collect the data. I remember when I first sent the instructions to our web admin to include this database, within a few hours, it crashed. And for weeks, we couldn't get it working. There was some sudden security issue with it that didn't exist in the past. But we have this European Crash Retrieval Initiative that is something that we only do a little bit in our free time when we don't do our science, like a hobby project. And the idea there is to collect all kind of observations pointing towards a crashed UFO in Europe, because if UFOs are crashing in the United States, they should also be crashing in Europe. And we would like to map them. And if we get a really good case, simply go there and pick it up. Why should we be waiting for some disclosure from a government when we can actually maybe do it ourselves? That's the idea.
I love that. That is fantastic. Well, best of luck on that. Well, Beatriz, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to having you back on the show and hearing of your progress. Thanks for coming on.
A pleasure.
All right, that was the interview with Beatriz Villarroeal. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I have to say I was a bit off of my game yesterday. For me, it's been a challenge to learn not to go and like stumble over your words and whatnot. And yeah, yesterday I think I was pretty off. And then of course we had the pretty bad Zoom delay that was going on. But anyway, I thought it was a really great interview. She was absolutely lovely. I think we should see more amazing women like her in ufology. It just seems to be so male-centric. I'm not quite sure why. Anyway, it was really great. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We always try to keep our show times exactly the same so people know when to expect the show, and we always do our best to book guests that can appear during our live shows, so it gives you the viewers at home, the opportunity to ask questions. But certain folks that tend to be pretty busy or overbooked, it can be difficult to get them to commit to that time. And we had tried several times to get her on the show, and finally she had an opening yesterday early morning, and that is when we booked her. Anyway, so yeah, we'll definitely have her on. I'm excited to hear what she has coming up. And while I'm thinking about it too, I also want to welcome a couple members that just joined chipping in to support us. Martin Vandenborg, who has become a member on YouTube, and Rebecca Wells, a new subscriber on Patreon. Anyway, so some of the things that stuck out to me were, of course, these photographic plates, and she brought up some really interesting points. One, the plates were taken before any satellites or airplanes, or at least airplanes that can move as fast as what we have today. Those weren't around when they took those plates. Secondly, another interesting point I thought as well was she noted that Wikipedia had been putting peer-reviewed papers regarding the Washington D.C. 1952 UFO flap, and guess who was removing them? It was Lucky Louie. I still think he is part of the Guerrilla Skeptics group. Don't have solid evidence on that, but we know certainly that the Guerrilla Skeptics keep targeting any of these pages related to UAP, UFO, or anything pseudoscience, even chiropractic. They go and hammer those pages. It's just unbelievable. A total propaganda wing of these debunkers, but it's the debunkers. What do you expect? Anyway, yeah. So I thought that was really interesting that she had indeed noticed that her stuff had been removed. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that I did not know prior to her coming onto the show, and as I always say, I am not I don't consider myself a ufologist. I'm certainly not a UFO researcher. My knowledge about this topic is really pretty much just kind of like a big piece of Swiss cheese with lots of holes. So being new to this topic, there is a lot that I just simply do not know, and rely on people like our fans here that have been tracking this for way longer than I have. But anyway, this whole thing with Menzel, I had no idea about this guy. So apparently Harvard had the largest collection of photographic plates from telescopes that dated back all the way to 1888, literally the largest collection in the world. So this guy, Dr. Donald Menzel, who was a professional debunker, probably much like Mick West and some of the other folks that is pretty much their full-time job, trying to debunk all of this stuff and get people to stop asking questions. So he had written books debunking UFOs. I mean, he essentially was like the Mick West of the day, except obviously Mick West is not a scientist. This guy was. So this guy, Donald Menzel, goes and writes all of these books debunking UFOs. And anyway, so he gets hired to run the astronomy department at Harvard. And unbeknownst to everyone, he was also working for the National Security Administration. So you can't make that stuff up. So Menzel gets the job, and as Beatriz pointed out, literally job number one was destroying literally 1/3 of the historical photographic plates that Harvard had in its astronomy collection. And then the other thing that she noted as well was not only did he go and destroy all of these plates, he also destroyed the log books as well. So it wasn't like, okay, well, we can't find the plates, but if we go back, here are these stacks of log books, and we can see exactly what was observed on those particular plates. And I think the one thing that is really fascinating about all of this is this all was occurring during the height of all of the UFO activity, post-World War II, when the Cold War had been cranked up. So here this guy who's been writing books debunking UFOs, I'm sure if Twitter were around at the time, he would have put Mick West to shame, or I don't know, maybe Mick West is the reincarnated version of this guy. Who the hell knows? But anyway, so this guy goes into Harvard. He has his assistant go and destroy this large group of plates. It's not like he just comes in and says, hey, I'm the new head of Harvard Astronomy. We need to make some room in the basement. So let's everybody get together, look at the log books, figure out if there are any plates we can get rid of, or maybe ones that are really important that perhaps show some anomalous stuff. We keep those. No, this guy, he has his assistant go in and just throw this stuff out, including the log books, which would have been the backups. So, you ask yourself, it's like a scientist that is hired by Harvard University to run the astronomy department. I'm not a scientist. I know Mick West isn't a scientist, and certainly the guerrilla skeptics, none of those are scientists, more like clowns. But I can't imagine any scientist that they would just decide to go in and destroy data. What kind of scientist does that? I mean, that is completely, I don't know, that is very suspicious. And like you said, it was later discovered that he had been working for the NSA and doing nothing but trying to explain away UFOs. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting that Beatriz brought up, one of many things, but that Menzel's name appeared in the Majestic 12 documents. Now, I had read the Majestic 12 stuff like years ago when I was kind of, sort of beginning to become reinterested in the topic, and I certainly didn't recall that. But and who knows if the Majestic 12 documents are real? They seem real to me, but I'm not a researcher, so I can't really say. But how fascinating that Menzel would be in there as well. Another interesting point that she brought up was this thing that they refer to in astronomy as the Menzel Gap. So here Harvard has been taking these photographic plates from I'm guessing one of the strongest telescopes in the world. She talked about what a great telescope Harvard had. So Harvard had been taking these photographs of these plates since the 1850s or late 1800s, something like that, for a long period of time, obviously long enough to be filling up a basement. And then Menzel goes, throws away a bunch of plates, gets rid of the log books, and then, oh, by the way, during this whole big UFO wave, decides to stop taking photographic plates. So this entire history of Harvard taking these plates, taking photographic plates through these telescopes, Menzel comes in and shuts all of that down. So you've got a guy that worked for the NSA, was the Mick West of the 1950s, except this guy was an actual scientist and I guess knew what he was talking about, but he certainly was on a mission to lie to everybody, much like the modern day debunkers. And then he shuts down any current photographic activity, taking photographic slides. Now, I don't remember, I think it was for a decade or two that stopped. I don't recall exactly what she said. But again, they referred to it as the Menzel Gap. And it's just odd that all of this happened when this Washington, D.C. UFO flap occurred, which clearly they weren't Chinese or Russian drones or anything of the nature. They weren't swamp gas. And this was certainly way before Mick West came up with the excuse of birds or pelicans or whatever it is that he likes to put out there as an excuse for the UFO thing. So it's just odd. All of that was going on, and here comes Menzel marching in and derails the whole thing, destroys a bunch of evidence. And again, going back to what she was pointing out, the fact that these plates, now some people have said that there could have been like a smudge or something on the raw material. I have no idea. But she pointed out that these were only in view for a very short period of time, and they were no longer there after that. So it's just very, very odd, very, very suspicious. And then, of course, the big thing that I had no idea about was that apparently former President John F. Kennedy was on the Harvard board for, I'm guessing it was like an advisory board for the Harvard Astronomy Department. John F. Kennedy, the former president that was of course assassinated. So yeah, just some really weird stuff. Then finally, she wrapped up talking about this Swedish effort called the European UFO Crash Retrieval Initiative. And again, oddly enough, sure enough, their website goes live, and then within a few hours, the website crashes. And they couldn't get the thing up for literally weeks. Now, it's up there now. I don't remember the link. I'll see if I can find it, and I'll post it in the YouTube chat. But anyway, yeah. So it's very, very interesting. I don't see any questions coming in, but I certainly really enjoy everyone tuning in to the show. And as I always say, if you enjoyed our show, we would absolutely appreciate it if you hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons. And of course, leave a comment. It's when you watch these YouTube videos and everybody's like, oh, smash the thumbs up button or hit the reminder bell. It all sounds corny, but believe it or not, those are the signals that YouTube uses to decide whether they want to recommend content, recommend like this show to people that have never watched it before. Maybe people that have never looked into the UFO, UAP topic. And of course, we are a strong believer that the more people that we can get this really important topic out in front of folks that have never tracked it before, the better. So you're not always preaching to the choir. You're bringing in new people, because we have always felt that this is a very serious issue. It's a national security issue, and the American voters need to pay attention to it, in my humble opinion. And of course, as always, we ask everyone to give their lawmakers, their elected officials, a call and tell them, you know what, we deserve transparency. We deserve to know what's going on. And we certainly don't want the CIA and the Department of Defense running the show and bypassing Congress, which is what they are always what they've been doing. So, so please tell your friends about us on social media, and the more people that can spread our word and tell everyone about our show, the better it is, I think, for everyone. And we're also slow to build on X, or what people normally call Twitter, and would appreciate your follow. Again, you can find us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show, and then pretty much we're on all the other social media platforms, and it's at The Good Trouble Show. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. We will see you with more great guests next week on The Good Trouble Show. Everyone have a great Sunday.